All right, we are live. Hello and welcome and happy Wednesday, everyone. I'm excited to be bringing you another installment of the LeadHership in Action series, uh, inspired by the LeadHership Reloaded series. And I am excited about my guest today, our conversation. And so before I go into that, just real quick, if you are watching and catching us live, please feel free to say hello in the chat so that we can say hello back. And of course, during the conversation, if you have questions or if there's anything that you want to share, I invite you to do so in the comments wherever you are watching. And so with that, I will introduce myself first and then introduce Dr. Christine. So I'm Sabine Gideon, an executive. I serve in the capacity of an executive coach and career. I serve in the capacity of executive career and leadership consultant. Sorry about that. I'm also the host of She Leads Now and the author of LeadHership Reloaded. So I'm excited to have you here today. And so without further ado, I will introduce my guest. Dr. Christine Fuselier is a wife, mother, business owner, leadership engineer, diversity and emotional intelligence consultant, and academic leader. She is currently the Dean of Instruction at Bryan Stratton Colleges, where she leads a team of program directors, faculty, and staff. She also chairs the Richmond Campus DSI Diversity, Sensitivity, and Inclusion Committee and serves on their corporate level DSI committee. She is the owner of the Leadership Doctor and is a leadership and diversity which is a leadership and diversity consulting firm, and has published 3 books: The Business of You, Leadership Rex, and You've Been Gifted Cancer. And I believe there's a so what after that, right?
Right.
I love that. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Christine.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I love these
Awesome.
topics.
Yes, every time we get to connect is a blessing. I mean, we were chit-chatting it up in the green room before I realized I needed to get on. So for those of you who are tuning in, you are in for a great conversation. So you were on the series last year. I can't believe it's already been a year, where we were talking about, post-pandemic, what does this mean for leadership? What does this mean for DEI? What does this look like in the higher ed space? Just because they had been shaken up in so many different ways. So before we get into, what do things look like a year later, I'd love for you to share, some of the most significant career milestones or catalysts that you've had leading up to this point where you are this powerhouse at the school, as well as within your own business.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think my career has put me on this entirely different trajectory, which really started, I believe, with education. And it allowed me to be able to pivot in different areas from being in the corporate space to moving into academia to being an author, a business owner, speaker, and all of those things. And most recently, I've been really going on this, I'll say a tour, if you will, of leadership and emotion, the tie between leadership and emotional intelligence. Because I think a lot of things, issues that we may have, are rooted in emotional intelligence, what that looks like, how do we manage our emotions, things like that. So I've been on that journey, and it's been great to see how it has impacted many people that I consult, as well as my students here and my team. Mhm.
Love that. Awesome. So you've been on a tour. Tell us a little bit more about this tour. Because again, you service or you serve so many different groups, if you will. And so tell us about, where you are today. What topics do you enjoy talking to the most and you feel has been most impactful during your tour?
Yeah, so I have been I went to a leadership conference, had the opportunity to spend some time in Ohio, working with a diverse group of people in the LGBTQIA space, and also being able to work with some people. I'm breast cancer survivor, so working in that space on how do we lead our way through such a traumatic experience. And I'm also this Friday I'll be speaking with our Chesterfield County diversity symposium, and we'll be talking about diversity and unconscious biases and things like that. So it's been one thing after the other, but it's all ties together in the three topics that I feel that are so important in our industries, across industries. That's leadership, that's diversity, and that's emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we were talking about this a little bit in the green room that, much of the work that you do today is a result of some of the experiences that you've had personally. And so, for those of you who heard the introduction, you heard that I shared that she has 3 books that she's put out. She supports emerging leaders, or at least those who are still in school, understanding or uncovering their leadership ability, as well as those who sit in leadership seats across organizations and across industries. So as we think about, from our conversation last year where things were just starting to unfold and in many ways settle down, a year later, what have you seen in terms of change for the better, meaning that we've transformed some of the systems that existed, and where do you still see opportunity?
I see we're still on this continuum of talking about diversity. We know in 2020 is what kind of triggered more awareness, and typically it is a event that does trigger a heightened awareness of diversity. But I'm glad to see that more organizations, schools, they are embedding it into the culture more. So it won't be such a reactive thing because from 2022 onward, many organizations were reacting to how do we talk about the hard topics? How do we have courageous conversations around diversity? And how do we get better in this space? And that's from how do we create a more diverse workforce? How do we manage a diverse workforce? All of those things. So I've seen that get better, and that's very comforting in this space, because sometimes it can be like, oh, it's a moment in time and then it goes away. But I see that there is many organizations have committed to it, embedded in everything within their culture, including their strategic plans, which is awesome. And it becomes so it's not a reactive thing when it comes up. I think our opportunities are to continue down that path, but also bring in other pieces to why it's such a struggle for people or organizations when it comes to diversity, and that is that leadership piece and that emotional intelligence piece. How do you weave those all together? Because they're all connected, and I think that's the opportunity. So we open up the conversation to bring all of those components in as well.
Yeah. I think it's well, it's funny and not funny at the same time, that, we're certain institutions, and when I say institutions, I mean like the work institution, if you will, is really struggling so much with what it looks like to embrace diversity and create spaces where diversity is not something that needs to be called out, but is something that is embedded. And the reason why I say that is because, you look at our society as a whole, right? Like, we live in a diverse society. While we may choose to, associate or live in certain places where it's a bit more homogenous. The point is, like, you can't walk down the street and not see or experience someone who looks different than you or may have a different lived experience. And then you look at Gen Z, where roughly 40% of them are from, multiple races, right, or multiple backgrounds. So you have an entire generation that exists, that almost 50% of them aren't, one race, so to speak. So I just find it interesting that we're grappling. I guess the good thing is that there have been some changes, but I just find it interesting that we grapple with how do we then create a space for the humans that we interact with and we see and we deal with on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think I was just having this conversation with someone a couple of days ago, and it's about the why, especially when we're looking at organization. What is the why? And if nothing else, it's a great business case to show all the value added when you talk about diversity. Everything from having a more inclusive, collaborative team to the financial benefits that it offers, to the branding benefits that it offers. So there's so much more that it offers, even if it was something that people struggle with internally. As a business owner, as a business leader, as an entrepreneur, the business case is very strong, and there's countless research on the benefits of diversity. And then if that is ignored, most companies aren't doing well who are not inclusive, who are not sensitive, culturally sensitive, and they're struggling. So that if nothing else, the business case is enough for people to say, well, maybe let me find out more about this. How do I become more diverse as an organization or as a leader?
Yeah, yeah. And as far as emotional intelligence, because I know you mentioned that as being one of your one of the pillars of where you focus your attention, are you leveraging that for both leaders within organizations, or are you also shaping the minds of the young men and women that you service through the school as well?
I'm doing both because I think it's important. I wish emotional intelligence was taught early on, like in our K through 12s. But I have the opportunity because I have a captive audience to really teach our students how to understand their emotions, understand the triggers that they have, how do you manage triggers? Because emotions are part of the human experience, so there's no cutting it off. It's about how do you manage it and how do you navigate through this thing called life. And I know nowadays is a lot different from when I came up, but how do you navigate your emotions through this thing called life without it being negatively impacting you long term? And how do you grow from the experiences that you have from an emotional standpoint? So when I'm working with my students, I'm very clear on sometimes you got to identify it when it's happening. What is that I'm feeling? What's the trigger that's causing it? And how do I manage through it? And give them tools to do that. I have this whole um, exercise like the GPS through emotional intelligence, and how do you find your way, and how do you reroute, and how do you stop, and how do you move forward, and how do you go a different direction. So I use those to help our students navigate through it. And then as leaders, because you're leading people, the human experience, again, they have emotions as well. And as a leader, you definitely have to learn how to manage your emotions. And you have to also be able to identify the emotions that your team may be having. And you will be able to deal with the situation a lot different if you are in tune to this person is either having a crisis or they're upset about something or they're really happy about something, but you're picking up on their emotions. That helps you become a better leader because it's not cookie cutter. You're really dealing with the individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another one that I think all of us as a society are coming to. I appreciate the fact that you're introducing students to emotional intelligence because Lord knows that it wasn't a thing or it existed, but it didn't have a name, it didn't have a framework until we were adults and kind of had to say, oh, well, how do you apply this? And I also think that when you look at the generations, I'm coming from a generation, my parents are boomers, where it was like you don't show emotion, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
or if you did, then somehow there was some level of guilt or shame or disregarded. And so as an adult, I had to learn how to tap into my own emotions just for my own sanity, let alone how that shows up in the workplace. And so, I think it's important that we're teaching the next generation, if you will, how to tap into their emotions. And I think the beautiful thing about Gen Z and even like some of the younger millennials that they are very in tune with their emotions. They're
Mm,
very in tune. Like that to me seems like that's not really their problem. It's how do they fit in, if you will, or how do they leverage their emotional intelligence into these spaces and these structures and these systems that people who weren't tapped into their emotions have created. And so I see that it's a beautiful opportunity for us to learn from them in
mhm.
how to um, how to express our emotions and share what it is that we're thinking and feeling, but also an opportunity to mentor them so that they can do it in a way that is mature and does not create, more challenges.
Right.
I see the double opportunity there for mentorship and learning.
Correct. And you see that there's a diversity of generations in that space that we have to acknowledge. So we do acknowledge, to your point, that when we were coming up, emotions were don't you don't display them, especially publicly, and if you did, you
Mhm.
were and now our generation now, they're open to doing it and they're very open about their emotions. But then we as an older generation should help them better manage it, because again, it's happening. It's nothing that you should shut someone down for having, but they should feel like this is where the inclusivity comes in. They must be in an environment where it is inclusive and safe for them to maybe have those emotions, and to teach them how to manage the emotion and kind of root cause it, because you have six levels initially. So you have sadness, you have happiness, you have being glad, fear, and those things. But behind the initial emotion, there's something else. So they kind of help them see, well, what's specifically making you sad, or what's specifically making you afraid. And there's a layer, there's like three dimensions of our emotions that you help them to unpack, and they see what the original trigger was. And then be able to better manage it in the future.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, and this is just something that I've learned on my journey of tuning into my emotions, is that, it really boils down to like, yes, what is the emotion behind the emotion? But also what meaning have we given certain emotions,
Mhm.
right? Like there's that whole notion of, oh, this emotion is bad and this emotion is good. And usually those are messages that we've gotten from others to define what that is. And so, for many, while we know that fear is a natural emotion, we all experience fear, we all feel fear, maybe at different levels, but society, our parents, everyone tells us like, no, like fear is a bad thing. Fear is a bad thing. And
Right,
so when
right,
we feel fear, we run away versus leaning into, okay, well, what is fear trying to tell me? And then vice versa, everybody wants to be happy and everybody wants to be joyful and everybody wants to be excited all the time because those are quote unquote good feelings, right? um,
right,
and we will move towards, or we will force sometimes those feelings in situations that don't exist. So I think that that's an important distinction as well, that we get to a place where yes, we can name the emotions, we can
yes.
identify what the initial trigger is, but also let go of whatever judgment we've been taught in
Mhm.
terms of whether or not this emotion is a good emotion or a bad emotion, and just accept that it's part of the human experience and it is just an emotion.
Exactly, exactly. And then as they move into careers, or as they move into being entrepreneurs, then those tools they can use to help others and help their team. So I think it's important that you use all three of them to help build or create or grow a better leader. And I think that's another opportunity we have in our society is our leadership, from the church house to the courthouse. We have a leadership gap. And I think it stems from a lot of emotional intelligence or lack thereof sometimes. And how do you reconcile that? And I think that requires a lot of change, a lot of switching of our mindsets, and a lot of openness to what does the new version of leadership looks like,
Mhm.
the different opportunities that we have.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so just shifting gears here, as you're ramping down 2023 and then starting to gear up for 2024, as we look ahead, if you could identify, one or two critical places for leaders within organizations to really start to focus their attention as it relates to being better leaders and creating these inclusive spaces, what would those core areas be?
I always start with people. I think you treat your people right. Your people are going to take care of your organization. So, a good leader, and we need a lot more focus on the people. And often in leadership, people are focusing on the numbers, and while you need the numbers to run to make the organization profitable, the people are making that happen. So, focus on the people and how do you help inspire, motivate them to be better. And a good leader is not about how many people that you're leading. It's not about how many people are following you. It's about how many leaders you can create. So positioning yourself as a leader to be a mentor, to help coach and develop other people so that they can have a leader. Because the worst thing you can do is walk into an organization and you have people who've been there for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. There's no succession plan, so there's no growth, you know. So having a plan to help grow and create other leaders. That's what a good leader does. And that's their legacy, right? They have people who will always speak about how they were developed and coached and mentored by some another leader. I think that's the main thing. And then focusing on the inclusivity because there's so many missed opportunities when we don't when we exclude people, but I will caution, don't be so inclusive that you become exclusive. So you exclude some people because you're trying to include everybody, everything. So you have to be strategic about it. And it has to be inclusive where not just we have a diverse workforce, but our workforce also has a seat at the table. Our workforce voices are being heard and they're in a safe space, in a space where they can have those opinions, they can have those feelings, they can have those hard conversations, and it's not punitive. I think those are the two main areas that as organizations that we need to have our leaders put more attention toward our people and being in an inclusive environment.
Yeah, I totally agree with those. Two things that I wanted to share. I love that you said the thing about leaders creating more leaders. I personally believe that is a good sign of an effective leader. And now, mind you, my philosophy is that we're all leaders, right? We all have the capacity to lead. But I do think that individuals who sit in seats of authority have an obligation and a responsibility to not just lead whatever vision or whatever mission that they're working towards, but to ensure that they have recreated themselves. So hoping that who they are is something that we want recreated, but all things being equal, that they have created and that they have instilled and that they have empowered those who report into them or work with them to be able to lead in that same level, and or in whatever sphere they're meant to, in building that
Mhm.
confidence. And I think the other thing, as far as inclusivity goes, some conversations that I've had in the recent months, in some organizations, obviously this is not all, but in some organizations, there's still a reluctance, while there is buy-in with regards to creating a more inclusive environment, while there are programs in place to help develop women, to help develop underrepresented groups so that they can move into leadership spaces, there's still a reluctance to actually be open in sharing data, right? So it's almost like you can't create a strategy if you don't know where you are today. And I'm still hearing a year later or 3 years later at this point that organizational leaders are still very apprehensive, very like uneasy with putting it out there of this is our current state. And that to me is baffling because it is from the current state that you can acknowledge, this is where we are. That's all it means. All it means is this current state and we have work to do. And I feel that in situations where, yes, the programs are there, the resources are there, and everything else is there, but we won't expose what current state is, like that's a huge misstep. So I would add that as a third thing to what you shared in terms of, organizations who have not quite gotten their mind around like, hey, this is our reality. As with any of us, right? Where we are today is not a reflection of necessarily where we are today. It is a reflection of decisions that we've made in the past. It is a reflection of actions that we've taken in the past or may have not taken in the past. And so I think leaders have an opportunity to give themselves some grace and expect grace from those in their organizations if their current state isn't quote unquote perfect or woke or elevated.
Mhm. That's a great point. I recall I was working at an organization where we were introducing diversity and ERG groups, employee resource groups, and he was like the chairman at the time. He said, "I don't know anything about this. I am," and they shared the numbers with us. And the fear is immediately people are going to judge. And they shared the numbers, and the way they shared them was that we are embarrassed about what we've seen, but we want to do better. So they look to their leaders, their affinity groups, leadership within their affinity groups to create these ERGs so that we can learn how to do better. So it's rooted. Sometimes that's rooted in the fact, like you said, it's embarrassing, and or some people are in denial. But owning up to it is one of the things that showed it separated him from many other leaders I've seen throughout my career. Like he was able to say, I never operated in this space before. He's like, I'm a white guy from Kansas. I never knew, I don't even know how to move around in this diversity space. So he was looking to us to help build it. And the numbers helped us show the transparency that he had. That gave us at least some comfort to say that he was committed to making the changes that needed to be made in the organization. So that's a great point that it is an opportunity for organizations to, do equity studies and see what that looks like and not be afraid to show what that looks like to the teams. So yeah, it's a great opportunity, I think, across the board. Hmm.
Yeah. And I love that leader's vulnerability, but it also goes back to what we've been talking about with regards to the emotional intelligence, right? So if the apprehension to share or to even look at this data is rooted in fear of, what people are going to think or judgment or even shame in some capacities, right? How can you ever heal from that? Or how can you ever address that? Or how can you ever create a culture in which individuals, demonstrate emotional intelligence if you as the leader won't first face your emotions? And again, shame, while no one wants to feel shame, it is still part of the human experience. And when we don't face anything, right, what we don't face will eventually face us at some point.
Hey,
So I think to your point earlier, it all ties in, that individual awareness of self, and then looking at how that's showing up in the decisions that you're making, the actions that you're taking, how you're treating others, how you welcome others' emotions. Like it's all intertwined. And I'm hopeful that, as we move into 2024 and even the years to come, that we start to see more leaders giving themselves permission to show up as themselves and not this archetype that we've created in our minds and our society of what it means to be a leader.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the call to actions I would have for leadership is there's work to be done, and that work starts with us. Like we have to, for everything from unconscious biases that we may have in this diversity space to our mindset of what that looks like from like our brand, like how we're protecting our brand. Brand protection can cause a lot of how we react as leaders, right? We don't want the brand to be hurt. So I would a call to action for leaders is start doing the work internally first. It's like with anything, you have to do it with yourself before you can help anyone else. Identify, like, I'll go back to unconscious bias. Identify that you have biases, which is why some people struggle so hard with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So do the work there first, and that work could be sitting in the space where you're uncomfortable and kind of root causing why am I so uncomfortable? Again, that ties into emotional intelligence, right? So there's some kind of uncomfortability, like dig in and like work through why you're feeling that way, and then validate your biases or unvalidate them, if you will. But why do you have a bias? And every people are not monoliths, so you may have had an experience with a certain type of person, but that does not mean all people are that way. You may have had a feeling about a certain person, but that doesn't mean all you have that feeling toward all people. But you have to do the work. You have to identify there's work to be done, and it has to start first with a leader. You can't lead other people if you can't lead yourself. I think that is what's key. If you can't lead yourself, you cannot possibly lead other people.
Facts, facts. I have one question for you, and then I want to move into the Blitz session. So when I read your bio there, it sounds like you guys shifted the wording or the meaning behind DEI and have DSI, so diversity, sensitivity, and inclusion. So tell me a little bit about what prompted that shift.
Right. So it initially started because in the moment, again, we're at the school, we started our DSI initiative very shortly after the murder of George Floyd. So there was a lot of sensitivity to it. There was a lot of cultural sensitivity that needed to be explained. People needed to have a safe space where they can express themselves. So it's more about being sensitive to what was happening in the moment. And then very shortly after, specifically in Richmond, there was the statues were coming down, and then there was a another shooting. So it was a lot of things that were emotional that were happening, and we had to be sensitive to that. So we focused on cultural sensitivity to let people know that when you come into this on campus, it doesn't stop, right? And we can't live in a world where when the campus is a bubble, because it's not. That those emotions and all of those feelings, they're coming into the classroom. So we had a great way of making sure not only our staff was aware through training, we had unconscious bias training, we did a lot of things that were helping them to be better in that space should something happen in the classroom. And then we were open with our students, very transparent with the students to let them know that this is a safe place for them as well. So that was the shift that we made in there to make sure that people, it's not just sometimes the equity does have you to be sensitive. You also have to bring in the equity pillar. But first, you have to be sensitive to even understand the rest of it. In my opinion, I
Yeah.
think you have to have some sensitivity to that.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So it almost sounds like literally you're living out that what we were just talking about with regards to emotional intelligence and recognizing what was needed in the moment
Hmm.
and supporting people in that capacity and still, integrating all of the other components, but
Yes.
in that moment, that's what the campus needed. And so that's what you
Yes.
guys rolled out. I love
Mhm.
that. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to get into the blitz session here, but for those of you who are watching live, thank you for joining. And of course, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, hopefully you've gotten some tidbits that Dr. Christine has has brought some hope this morning for us with regards to the changes and the shifts that are taking place. Of course, I will have her share all of her information so that we could include that in the links, so that while she continues her tour going into 2024, if you want to connect with her and touch base and learn more about the powerful work that she is doing across DEI, across emotional intelligence, across leadership in general, then you can do that. For those of you who are listening to the show or watching live as well, I just want to remind you that the book that inspired this conversation is LeadHership Reloaded: Reimagining, Redefining, and Rehumanizing Leadership, where I spoke with dozens, or yeah, maybe almost 3 dozen amazing women, powerhouses such as Dr. Christine, to learn about, where we are with the current landscape, and have distilled that information in a way that both organizations and individual leaders can really understand what the landscape looks like, where there are opportunities, and how they can become self-advocates for themselves within their career. So it is available on Amazon. Feel free to go and grab your copy, LeadHership Reloaded, or you can type in my name and I'm sure it'll come up. And also with that, I just wanted to share for those of you who are part of the She Leads community, that the Lead Hers Lounge will be returning in January. So if you are a part of the community, or if you're a woman in leadership who is looking to connect, to collaborate, and to share resources with other fabulous women, I invite you to join the wait list. It's really not a wait list. You can sign up and we'll get notified when we start meetings again in January. So with that, Dr. Christine, as we move into the Blitz section here, as you think about where you are today, and I know you have your advice that you would give to your younger self, which we included in the book. Dr. Christine was episode 50, I believe. As you think about just over the last year, I know you do a lot of reading just by nature of your work. Have there been any new books or any books that have come to mind that have been pivotal for you, or that you would highly recommend to the audience?
Absolutely. Outside of my books, I would, this is a book. It's called The Self-Aware Leader by John Maxwell. I actually have my team reading this book because, as I stated earlier, I think not only emotional intelligence, but leadership starts with self first. You can't lead others until you're able to lead yourself. And this book gives a lot of detail about how do you do everything from handling criticism with grace as a leader, because when you're in leadership roles, there's always someone who can say, well, if I was in charge, I would do it this way, or I don't think I disagree. So how do you handle criticism with grace? It also talks about working within your own strengths. And sometimes people think that because you're in a leadership role, you know all the answers, which we don't. We don't know all the answers. The beauty of it is know where your strength in, and then a good leader will leverage the strength of their team to help them become a better team. So this book, like I said, I have my team walking through this book so that again we can evolve as a leadership team, and then we're able to show that when we're in front of our students and our peers, to make sure that we're not only just, I believe the old saying, whether a leader is born or made, and that's always a debate, depending on who you talk to. Either way, whether they're born or made, they still have to grow. And in the growing piece, that's where things like this book comes from. Conferences, you have constantly have to evolve, because I think as a leader, it's your skill, right? It is, this is your thing. Just like a doctor has to keep up to date as to what's happening in their field, a leader has to do the same. So you have to continually grow. You have to continually invest in yourself. And if you're growing other leaders or creating other leaders, you have to invest in them as well and help them grow. So it becomes a continual thing. So this is the book that I'm reading now.
Okay, awesome. We will definitely be sure to include that in the show notes. And I love that statement regardless of whether or not a leader is born or made, they still have to grow. Like that in itself is a mic drop right there. So thank you for sharing that, and it's so true. So as far as how those who are listening or those who are watching, if they want to get in touch with you, learn more about the work that you do, what's the best way to do that, and where do you hang out on social?
The easiest way is through LinkedIn. That's where most of my stuff is centralized. Just type my name in LinkedIn, and all of what you'll see the things that I've done. Because I also believe people should see you do what you say you do. So if you're going to use social media, you help use it to boast your brand. So if you're branding yourself as a leader, people should see you in those spaces. So all of my information is there. Anything upcoming, like I said, I'm going to be on a panel discussion with the Chesterfield Chamber of Commerce, the DEI symposium, which is going to be this Friday from 9 to 3. I will be participating in that all day. So as things are coming up, I usually post what my next thing is going to be, and people can reach out if they have questions or want to have a conversation. Mhm.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And so, as we wrap up, I want to share two things from our conversation last year. So, just because I love it so much, your advice to your younger self is to know your worth and be unapologetic for being you. Don't negotiate your worth. I think that that is just such amazing advice, and my current self needs that reminder at times. So thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that and allowing us to have that as a reminder. And then your desired legacy is to be remembered as a person who impacted the lives of everyone she touched, good, bad, or ugly, and did it intentionally.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's important to.
Is that still is that legacy?
Yeah, I
I'm sorry.
think there's two things to that. Since constantly evolving, there's a word that people are say, or a word or a statement that you hear people say. It's called imposter syndrome. And as a leader, I've never experienced that because I will tell anybody who knows their worth that whatever room you walk in, you deserve to be there. Whatever room you walk in, you own that room. That imposter syndrome, that's about projecting sometimes what you think other people think about you opposed to what you think about you. So that type of like make sure knowing your worth, if you know your worth, you won't have imposter syndrome because you're not an imposter. Whatever room you walk in, you deserve to be there and act as such.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for another mic drop moment. With that, I thank you again for being on the show. I so appreciate your time, your wisdom, your sharing. A year later, what's working, and again, thank you for the hope that you've shared this morning. For those of you who are listening or watching live, the actual links to connect with Dr. Christine will be in the show notes, as well as the links to her book. So books, excuse me, all three of them. So please be sure to check those out, and of course connect with her on LinkedIn. Let her know that you heard her on the She Leads Now podcast or the LeadHership in Action series. And with that, Dr. Christine, thank you again. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and we will be back next week with another wonderful powerhouse. Take
Okay,
care.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.